So welcome everybody. Thanks very much for joining our final Lunch and Learn of the summer term, I suppose. So 3 weeks now until the summer holidays. I know it's been an absolutely crazy time. As you know, at Pathway CTM, and sorry for those of you that don't know, my name's Chris McNamara. I'm the founder and CEO of Pathway CTM. And over COVID-19, it's been a really interesting and challenging time. I know particularly for you guys as teachers. At Pathway CTM, we've been doing daily webinars for 13 weeks or so that we've been running that, I think. And every single month, we've been doing monthly webinars for teachers and indeed for parents as well. And we're going to continue that theme from September onwards. But of course, we're going to let you have your summer breaks. So this is the last one that we're doing today. I'll run through the agenda shortly, but I'm really excited about today because I've got a big name and big brand in Alan and Overy and Hannah, who will interview today, and also the CEO of the ISC, Stephen, who's got fantastic experience, and we use the ISC as part of our knowledge base to make sure that we're sharing that information with you guys as teachers. Gatsby's levels 8, I suppose, but Gatsby level 2 is, I think, really key for today in terms of that labour market information, hearing from an employer firsthand, hearing from Stephen at the ISC about the labour market and some key trends that you'll be interested in. I think it's great that we can give you this access. And I'm also going to be speaking to you today about our pre-employment programme, how we're able to make it free from September for the first time in my 6 years of doing this, and what you can do to get involved with that. Catherine, do you just want to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, hi everyone. I recognise a few teachers that I've been speaking to this week, which is great. So I'm Catherine and I'm on the education team at Pathway CTM. So looking forward to speaking with more of you soon.
Good stuff. So I've just shared the poll, guys, so you can all have a look at it. 77% of our audience are careers teachers. Welcome. And then 7% head of sixth form or in that sixth form team. I know we've got one governor on so far. I'm sure many more will join. And don't worry if you do have to dip out of this. I know that you're all on busy schedules. Thanks for joining. Which year group from September are you most concerned about the education being affected by COVID? 50% is the outstanding winner there of year 11s, of course, in that GCSE year. 30% year 13. So we're looking at those destination years as the years that you're most concerned about, which is completely understanding. With your education establishment in mind, do you agree with the statement that underprivileged students are worst affected over COVID-19? 87% of that are saying that they agree. I do understand we have a real spectrum of schools on today, and so 10% couldn't comment, which I appreciate. Has COVID-19 made you more likely to advise on any particular career route? Now, this is interesting. 53% saying, yep, COVID maybe makes me think to, say, go to university. 40% are saying choose an apprenticeship. So that's interesting, Stephen, I suppose, for later on. And just 7% are saying choose to defer your year. I mentioned earlier, 1 in 5 we know are looking to defer their university course based on potentially having an online year, which you could argue is that good value for money. And finally, we've heard about the 1 billion fund from the government around that catch-up funding. Some of the careers teachers and head of sixth forms we're speaking to are trying to use that for careers, and they're trying to use it for their most underprivileged students to make sure that those who, we've just outlined might be most affected from COVID, how we can help them catch up. But on the panel today, 80% have said that they're not sure what's happening with that funding. It is very new, and I know it's down to the head teacher and where they're going to use it. 10% have said potentially they would look for that in terms of using it for careers, not just core subjects, but 7% have said, no, strictly for those exams, strictly for core curriculum. And I'm sure that'll be into those, year 11s, absolutely, in terms of those GCSE years. So let's move on. Those of you that don't know Pathway CTM, this is what we do, I suppose. So we work with students, education, whether that be colleges, schools, the Careers and Enterprise Company, LEPs, communities, councils. We work with employers, often big blue chips. I'm a big advocate for working with a big firm on your CV when you start your first job, and parents and guardians. My main passion, I think, from Pathway CTM is I don't mind where you go as a young person, and we work with your 11s, 12s and 13s exclusively. That's where we make most impact in those destination years or building towards it via work experience. I don't mind where you go, but I care that you have an informed decision. And I think too many young people go to uni because their backgrounds and their families saying you've got to go to uni, maybe because I didn't. And teachers sometimes not understanding, particularly around the labour market and the different opportunities that are available. By the way, it's very hard to keep up to date with it. It's our full-time job to do so in terms of apprenticeships, work experience schemes, when they start, when they stop, when you've got to apply for them. So it is a full-time job. So that's why we work with schools and colleges around the UK to make sure that students who do our survey, which we'll speak about, they're notified. So if a young person says they're interested in creative studies, they'll find out that Sony Music has an internship scheme that they might want to do before they go to uni or before they choose to do an apprenticeship. So it's all matched down to understanding what's out there. But if you're a young person going to go to university, Alan and Overy, for example, amazing graduate scheme who we'll hear about today, you need to be meeting these companies before you go to uni. 80% of young people get a 2-1 or above if you go to university. When I went about 10 years ago, that was 71%. So you need to be doing more to differentiate yourself. And I'm sure Stephen might talk about this later in terms of if you are going to go for that graduate role, many graduate schemes, in fact, take, I think on average, around 50 to 70% of their graduates through those internship programs. So we try and get young people to meet the brands early and decide where you want to go. And we specialize in helping young people through the apprenticeship application processes, because that's our niche, I suppose. So in terms of today, you'll hear a little bit about me for about 5 minutes or so now. Catherine, let me know if I'm speaking too much. And I suppose what brings me here today. We'll be hearing from Hannah at Alan and Overy about their amazing schemes that they have at A&O, and indeed what we've done with them over the last couple of months over COVID. And then Stephen will round us up with some fantastic slides on labour market information. We are recording today and we will send this round to you, but please do try and stay on and do ask any questions that you can throughout. How you do that is the Q&A box. If you've got any set questions, Catherine's watching that at the moment, and we're going to gather all of those questions and ask them at the end. If there's a specific one that you do have as we go along, we will try and intervene and ask it if it's appropriate as we interview Hannah and Stephen later on. So first and foremost, I guess what brings me here. So I've been doing Pathway CTM now for 6 years. I went to uni, I got a 2-1, like I was saying, and I went because I was really passionate about sport. And you know, a young person, I went to Loughborough Uni, young person who's interested and passionate about something should go and pursue that if that's really what they want to do. But I didn't know about internship schemes, to be honest. I didn't have a clue about those and I didn't do one. I actually, my journey was PGCE and PE teaching and then into business. And then I really found my love just for wanting to give back and doing what I do best and my team in terms of engaging and motivating young people to fulfill their potential. Just to give you a bit of insight, last week, I did an informal drop-in with students about what they're worried about, whether it's choosing universities or apprenticeships. And so many young people are worried about what to study. And, I need to study this, I need to study X, Y, Z. And again, it'd be good to hear from Hannah and Stephen about what you do need to study to get into some big firms. Because quite often, it's not about studying something specific. It's about studying what you're passionate about and having that story about why you're studying that and where you want to go with your life. So I'm really passionate about providing young people with that opportunity to actually say, potentially, you don't have to always get a 2-1. You don't always have to study science to get into a STEM role. You don't have to study potentially law to become a lawyer. And that's really quite inspiring, I think, for young people to hear. So over COVID-19, it's been, like I say, 12, 13 weeks. I have lost track, but we've been doing daily webinars. They're all on our YouTube channel. About 90% of them are. Some of them we're not allowed to share due to the employers not having the ability to share them publicly. But 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock, we've been doing webinars, and you can see there what we've been getting up to in June. A real breadth of opportunities for young people. It's not just me or my team speaking, it's always with an employer. And that's something that I've learned over COVID-19 to bring into our pre-employment program from September. Every single webinar we're doing from September will continue to be with an employer, making sure that we're helping with Gatsby 5 and understanding about the labour market. To give you an example, guys, if you haven't seen any of our sessions, and please do put in the chat box if you've been on any. I'm not sure what teachers are online, but if you have been on any and you've seen any, please do comment in the chat box. It started off with Q&A insight events. So for example, interviewing, like I will with Hannah in a second, learning about A&O, learning about the roles available and interviewing different apprentices, graduates, interns. And then we flipped actually into doing more interactive sessions. So Amazon, competency-based questions, BP, similar, Arcadis, EY, strength-based questions, looking into different assessment center styles, and actually starting to help young people in small breakout rooms learn about online activity and how you can really enhance yourself and get ready for that assessment. Spotlight on different sectors as well, whether that be construction, engineering. We've been doing lots and lots of different activities to make sure young people who might not have an idea of where they want to go yet can actually learn, or if they are passionate about something like Bayer, we did a webinar with them this week in pharmaceuticals, they can learn about what opportunities they've got. With Allen and Overy, what we've done, it's been amazing actually. We've done 8 different webinars, and you can see 4 of them that we've done in June there, which has been fantastic. We've had hundreds of students turning up and learning about A&O. For example, 50% of the workforce aren't lawyers, you know, actually it's about 42%, I believe, that are. So that's really interesting. And all those students that were actually loyal to A&O and turned up to every single one, they got a bonus session where they got a really good interactive session with John, their CTO, just last week. So giving students that access and giving students that reward for being so dedicated to being on webinars over this difficult period. So that's what we've been getting up to. And I've used that, and this is my final slide, in terms of looking ahead to September. So we're working on, and we've finalised 3 key modules that I think every young person needs before they go into the labour market. And you can see there's 9 different sessions that we'll have online, and this is all free for young people based on the support we get from the likes of Allen and Overy to make sure that this programme is socially mobile and young people can access it. So do speak to us about that. Kathleen will be sending you some information about it. But ultimately, all of those different sessions, we have videos, we have resources, we have extension tasks. You can deliver them in the school, in the college, as well as students doing it on their phone on the way back from school, hopefully that they're going to be going to from September. So that's a little bit about our online programme, I suppose. And I must let you know as well that students will continue to get webinars every single week from us from September. So that's exciting. And webinars will also be available for parents and teachers every month exclusively. And finally, our outreach programme. Now I know we've got some customers and schools on the session today. This is ultimately where we can really focus on those students that need a bit more support. So you can hire us out for 3 sessions in the day. It is virtual. It's going to be virtual all the way till January. Then we're going to look up and see what's happening there, because we're planning lots of different sessions between September and December. Then hopefully we'll be able to do these physically in school or college. And we're really aiming that at those that need it most. It might be your pupil premiums in year 11. Again, those year 11s that need a bit more support. If you have access to their curriculum, I know it might be challenging. It might be those year 13s who are unsure about where they want to go versus students in year 12s. This is designed for me and one of my team to be on that session, bring an employer in with us, make sure that we're identifying Gatsby 3, 4 and 5 with that. Regarding Gatsby 6, we'll touch on this in the session, but a lot of our employers now are doing virtual work experience, and we have a whole week of that the week after next. 5 different days, 5 different employers, and many different employers are looking to do that because they recognize that your challenges are around that Gatsby 6 and that experiences of the workplace, but we can achieve that through online mechanisms, not by going physically just to the site. So really exciting times, I suppose, I think, by doing this online and getting lots of employers backed up and supporting schools. And the employers that we do work with do want to support schools. And that's why we've got Allen and Overy on the call today, who have been great supporters with us. They recognise young people were struggling over COVID-19 with the challenges, and they've supported our programme. So Hannah, I'd love to introduce you, please, just to give us a little bit more information about the company, your role, and entry-level programmes available at A&O.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So my name's Hannah Rolfe. I head up the graduate recruitment here in London at Allen and Overy. We are a global commercial law firm. We've got offices, I think, 44 offices globally. You might recognise our name as kind of knowing us as one of the Magic Circle firms. And I guess just to give you a flavour, the kind of areas of law that we specialise in tend to be corporate banking and ICM. That's kind of our main bread and butter. By way of my background, so I've been at A&O now 3 years, which I always joke feels like 10 years in a really good way. Lots of change and innovation in that time. I've been in the early career space now. I think it's coming up for 8 years. I was head of grad for a consultancy prior to A&O. I've worked in the engineering sector, and I've also been on the supplier side in terms of assessment and selection, so fairly varied background. I guess me and my team, so we run a variety of different programs for students. So we most recently have launched a program called A&O Accelerate, which is for students who are year 13. And it was particularly targeted at students from socially mobile cold spots across the UK. And we partnered with a charity for that program. And that's kind of one of those programs designed to inspire those young people, give them access to what a legal career is, and almost give them a really immersive 2-day experience. So that's one of our programs. In addition to that, we also run first-year programs. We run our vacation schemes, which are more the traditional route into law, which normally convert onto a training contract. And again, I guess the layer on top of that, we run a huge amount of diversity programs as well, working with all various different partnerships, Aspiring Sisters, Rare, who you might have heard of, as well as Sue and her team in the kind of CSR perspective and linking it into the schools outreach work that we do as well.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Hannah. And regarding COVID, then the effect on your business as a multinational law firm, just tell us a little bit about that, please, and maybe in terms of the recruitment side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess first of all, when kind of COVID started hitting and we all were assessing the landscape and trying to figure out where we were going forward, I was actually exceptionally reassured by our senior management. I think as a firm, they learned a lot when the last crash happened. And you'll hear from Stephen later today on this topic as well. But they very much recognise that in terms of how we recruit 2 to 3 years in advance for our pipelines. And as such, any decisions that would be made now will hit us kind of 2-3 years down the line. So they've really, ring-fenced, protected all of our early careers outreach, as they have with all of our diversity programs as well. It was like, absolutely, they are core to our offering and they must remain in place. So in terms of that, for me going to market later this year, it is business as usual. We haven't pushed any of our intakes back or delayed any start dates or anything like that. I know some firms have, and I know there are some sectors, again, I think Stephen's probably going to talk about this, but some sectors who, because of the timescales in which they recruit, are going to be a lot harder hit than we have been at the moment. But I think, personally, I've had to have a lot of reassuring conversations with a lot of students out there at the moment who are worried about what's going to happen with their kind of training contracts and start dates. So a lot of it has been really managing those students and supporting them over what has been a really unsettling time for them.
And in terms of assessment and selection, Hannah, what is your traditional, I suppose, and are you going to be adapting it in any way if COVID continues?
So I've spent the last 3 months virtualizing all of our programs, which was a challenge in itself. And now my attention, I've just come up for air, my attention is now flipping to our assessments. Our assessment is going to have to go virtual. I think there's very limited plans for us to be back in the office in the next, I'd say, 3 months. I think it's going to be early next year before there's any kind of decent capacity back in the office. And as such, that just means all of my assessors are going to be all over the place. Therefore, I need to run a virtual program. I've begun looking at kind of different providers and the technology that's out there. Obviously you need to be really mindful of being able to kind of prepare the students, make them feel really comfortable, make sure that we can kind of accommodate additional requirements students might have, as well as those that might be struggling with tech and maybe sharing a laptop with other people or things like that. So there's all of these things which we need to work through at the moment. I think it can be done, absolutely. I ran some virtual assessments just when COVID hit. We were due to do some, so we did it as a bit of a pilot. They worked absolutely fine, absolutely fine. You just have to kind of assess in a slightly different way, in that you have to acknowledge that there aren't as many of the behavioural cues like you would normally get from someone sitting across the table. So there might be some more awkward kind of pauses in the conversation and things like that. So it's just being mindful of some of those kind of more nuances when you're assessing in a virtual way. But I'm quite excited for the experiment later this year. So we'll see how it goes.
No, absolutely. And Hannah, we've been doing assessment centres virtually just to train students up. So breaking them into different rooms on Zoom, and then going in and creating the assessment centre task. And then young people have actually been, putting up their hand, they've been speaking out loud. Some of them, actually just really then coming back into the main group at the end and presenting like they would do at a normal assessment centre. So I think it's great. Yeah. I think young people will be able to do it and embrace it, I suppose. But maybe a message for teachers, for the teachers on the call, of course. What should I be thinking based on, I need to be adapting to what you're thinking as an employer. What should I maybe be doing if you had a magic wand with young people, getting them ready?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time, right? Because the young people are now entering into this kind of completely virtual world. And we ran our virtual vacation scheme last week, which actually was a huge success. And it was amazing to see the students adapt to that environment so quickly. I think they were quite nervous. So I guess for teachers, it's reassurance to the students. It's probably thinking about some of those skills that they're going to have to display in a slightly different way. So, adaptability, coping, resilience, being able to deal with change quite quickly, because I think that's what's happening more and more as we go into this virtual environment. And there's some of the skills which we were very much looking for as part of our virtual vacation scheme last week was, okay, how quickly are they going to adapt? Are they going to, take on board having to operate in a slightly different way. And actually, I was blown away by the students. I really was. And by physically taking them out of the building, I actually think their creativity and innovation levels just shot through the roof. It was amazing, actually, removing some of those physical barriers of the environment that they would normally be in, and just giving them broad access to the firm in terms of people they could contact. I actually think they demonstrated way more innovation and creativity than we've seen in some of our previous vacation students.
Fantastic. And Hannah, I've just got a question from John Drinkwater from Hugh Christie. Hi, John. Good to see you here. A question for Hannah. Are the graduate selection criteria still the same?
Yes, our criteria is still the same at the moment. We are being really transparent, John. We're just kind of in the process. We've got our Law of the Future framework, which we redesigned 2 years ago, and we work to at the moment. It's all on our website. It's very transparent for the students. We're currently looking at the assessment techniques which we had traditionally used in person, and we are looking at them very carefully to say, okay, do they need to be adapted? If so, how are they going to be adapted to be displayed on a virtual screen? Because it is very different having, you know, a pad of paper that you can flick through and kind of read through, to having digestible information on a screen presented in a different way. So we're very mindful of that at the moment, and we're very mindful of just us taking the time to think through, to your point, are there any qualities which we're really going to struggle to get across through a virtual assessment centre? I don't have the answer for you just yet on that, I'm afraid. I think it's, like I said, it's a bit of a work in progress. And maybe we do a follow-up session kind of later in the year or something to kind of regroup on how it's gone.
That'd be amazing. Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you, John, for that question. And I just wonder, in terms of grades and subjects, so young people often very stressed that they're not going to get into A&O unless they do X, Y, Z. Just what are the expectations that we need to know as teachers from A level up to university?
It's a tricky one. I think the graduate landscape has changed dramatically in the time that I've been working, and certain sectors now place less emphasis on grades and degree, but there are still some sectors which really require, you know, high levels of IQ and EQ. And I think from that regard, so we have our minimum criteria, which is 2 A's and a B and a 2-1 degree, but we do take into account mitigating circumstances. We also use a contextualized recruitment system, which allows us to benchmark the students' grades against the average of that school. So we can see, for example, if someone's got 2 A's and a B, but they come from a school in the bottom 10 percentile of the country, we know that they've massively outperformed their peers in that school, and we take that into account when we're making decisions on who to come through. Law is extremely competitive, and I think most law firms, being really honest and transparent, we are very meticulous on when a student goes to university, you know, they're different grades and they're different subjects. So we're looking for 2-1 consistent performance across you know, all of the different subjects which they study, taking into account maybe 1 or 2 that were dropped, but we are looking for consistent performance. And you know, that is still our proxy that we use as looking for kind of ability and potential. I don't think anyone's really nailed it on the head as to what potential looks like, and it's very difficult when you're running a volume process. It is. So they're the kind of markers which we use at the moment.
Okay, and I can echo that. I mean, I was interviewing many graduate trainees from A&O over the last 2 months, and all different types of backgrounds, all equally impressive. Of course, we do work with different employers. A&O is one, you know, it's a high grade. It's a great company. It's potentially, you know, challenging to get into it, and it's a high level. But it was great to know that diversity still lives it really is embedded in that company. So I was quite inspired by that over the last couple of months. We've got a question here though, Hannah, saying, do you prioritise Russell Group universities?
So we have applications, so we're open for applications from all universities, all degree subjects. I wouldn't say we prioritise it. So for example, if someone's got a non-Russell Group university, they've got an outstanding, you know, application form, then we will take them through. We very much look at an individual holistically when we're screening, but you have to understand that we get 4,000 applications a year for 80 places. You know, it's very difficult sometimes to make that final decision as to who goes through. And sometimes it can be down to the smallest factor. And we do a lot of calibration when we're reviewing all of the applications. So, you know, I know that the majority of applications that we reject, it's not that they're a bad application or they're not, you know, not got potential or they're not great students. It's sometimes just come down to kind of really small factors as to why we've taken some candidates through and not others.
Okay, fantastic. Good stuff. Okay, Hannah. So in terms of A&O then, so you have the graduate route. I know that you have summer schools, don't you, as well? And maybe potentially winter. I'm not too sure from if you go to university. Could you just outline those and potentially any outlook on apprenticeships? Because apprenticeships are becoming more and more available in different sectors. Magic Circle companies potentially a little less so, but just any insights on that would be great.
So we haven't got one at the moment. We are considering it isn't without its challenges. I know that we've spoke to kind of peers at different organisations, and we appreciate that a younger person often needs a lot more support when they come into the organisation, and we're very mindful that A&O is a fast moving machine. It's not to say that we can't do it. Like I said, we are reviewing it at the moment. We just want to make sure that if we drive it forward, we've obviously got all the mechanisms in place to really support those young people. So I guess that's on apprenticeships at the moment. In terms of the other programs that we run, like I said at the start of the call, we have our vacation scheme. So we run a winter vacation scheme and we run a summer vacation scheme. We also accept direct training contract applications. So there's kind of two routes. You can either come through a vacation scheme or you can come directly through a training contract. And we have all of our feeder programs which go into those. So our first year programs, A&O Accelerate that I just talked about. Right. And we also have kind of all of the diversity programs that we run in partnership with different organisations as well.
Great. And what we'll do, guys, we will follow up with you afterwards, whether it be after this webinar or indeed next week, just to give you an overview of those. There's also Smart Start for those who are going into year 12 next year, and that's run by Sue, who we're working with. So yeah, if there's any year 11s going into year 12 next year, it's great that you guys have access into all these different diversity programs that A&O do run. Fantastic. Okay then, Hannah. Well, thanks very much. We'll leave it there for now, and we'll come back in a second. Do think of any questions you have for Hannah at the end. Stephen, are you there?
I am. I've just unmuted myself, Chris. Hi, everybody.
Jolly good, Stephen. Good to see you. Welcome. If you just want to introduce yourself, Stephen, and I'll just go to the next slide.
Sure. Yeah. So, Steve Isherwood. So, I run an organisation called the Institute of Student Employers. We used to be called the AGR, the Association of Graduate Recruiters. We've been around for about 50 years. We changed the name because the employers we work with, Hannah's a great example, you know, Hannah, we work very closely with A&O. Employers have changed the way that they operate over recent years. So it's not just all about graduates, it's also about school leavers and apprenticeships, and employers across the board are operating much more in the school space than they used to. So a change of name very much reflects that. But we're a not-for-profit organisation. The majority of our members are employers, so we represent that employee community. But we also have some schools, we also have universities, and we have vendors who are within our membership. My own background, like Hannah, been around graduate recruitment and development for quite a long time. I used to run graduate recruitment for EY. For UK and Ireland, which was the job I did just before this. So I do come from an employer background. So hopefully can add some of that sort of lens to what I'll talk about today.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Stephen. And you've got a few key slides that you've selected based on what some of the teachers have been asking us for information. Just to give a bit of context, I do lots of different talks in different careers hubs with the Careers and Enterprise Company around the UK. And it's great, the LEP is giving local labour market information. But I thought it'd be really good just to get that national approach from your point of view. I'm always trying to share the information that we get from the ISE. I know there's opportunities for schools to also become members. So it'd be great to give us a bit of insight and also speak about how schools can get more involved in the company as well.
Sure, of course I can. Okay, so let's talk about where we're at with the market at the moment. So we've done 2 pieces of research since the COVID crisis kicked off. Some of the data I'm going to talk about really comes from the second one of those that we put out 3 or 4 weeks ago. So this first slide here is talking about what's happening with vacancies. That's the question that most people want to know, because bottom line, we're talking about jobs and careers here. There's no doubt that the market has been hit. There's no getting away from that fact. Graduate vacancies are down. We've split out our data between large firms and SMEs and small and medium-sized enterprises, because it is a very different picture for both, which is a bit different to what we experienced in the financial crash. Overall, graduate vacancies are down by about 14%, but it's the non-graduate market, so that's apprentice-type roles that have been hit harder. And overall, those are down just by over 30%. But as you can see, that's split in there. I won't go into sort of too much detail on the numbers. You can see that hit is harder with SMEs. Why are non-graduates hit harder? Part of that, I think, is to do with complexities of the apprentice levy and some issues around about that. But there's also the simple operational fact that most employers tend to do their graduate recruitment a bit earlier in the cycle than their non-graduate and apprentice type vacancies. So what happened when when the lockdown started was most employers said, okay, we're going to freeze hiring. We can't hire any more people. We don't know what the future's holding at the moment. And actually, they completed most of their graduate recruitment, but not so much their non-graduate recruitment. So I think that's also part of the reason for the discrepancy in those numbers. I will come back to this. There is a challenge with our data, which is, of course, that it is pretty negative, and it's a danger, I think, when students, whether they're at school or at university, they read the headlines, think, right, that's it. Employers aren't doing anything. They've shut down, and there's no jobs out there. What do I do? And whereas that isn't really the case. Although hiring is down, actually, if you think about flip the other way, so in large organisations, that means that 88% of graduate hiring is still happening as planned this year. So it is important to emphasise that there are still opportunities out there, but I will come back to that. And I won't talk about the interns placement bit on this slide. I'll do that a little bit later because it's a bit more nuanced than just the numbers show. So do you want to flick to the next slide, Chris, and I'll talk about what's happened sector by sector.
Great.
So one of the problems is that we do generalise about this student labour market, whereas actually it's a series of very different labour markets and different sectors are affected differently. And that's what this slide shows. Again, I won't really go through all the details on the numbers. It's fairly plain to see. And also by reading the press, it's obvious which sectors have been hit the hardest. So non-food retail, leisure industries, travel industries, those are the sectors that have been hit hardest. Built environment, construction sites, those businesses, again, have been hit very hard. And they just are in a position whereby they're thinking they can't bring people into their organisations. But other sectors, hardly touched at all. Public sector recruitment still very much going ahead as planned. We've heard from Hannah about A&O. The legal sector at a graduate level, again, very little impact on actual hiring there. And there is one positive number there, of course, which is health and pharmaceutical industries, which are actually showing growth in the non-graduate space. That's mostly apprentices. But within all those other negative numbers, there are organisations that are still hiring. So we have employers that still have vacancies to fill. Think about the public sector, so people like Teach First, Police Now, they're still very much hiring at the moment. Lots of businesses in the tech sector, they're still hiring and are still going through recruitments at the moment as we speak.
And Stephen, just to say, this was done a few weeks ago, wasn't it? This study, I believe.
Yes,
for example, the built environment, we work very closely with the Home Building Federation, helping young people, particularly from colleges, getting into construction. You could argue, I suppose, in your job, your numbers are always changing, aren't they? And I suppose that minus 75% looks very bad, but that might have been at the time when they couldn't have gone because social distancing, they couldn't have gone on site. Is that an argument, I suppose, there? And could that maybe be a bit more positive now? It
is an argument, and it could be a bit more positive. The challenge is, this is very different to the financial crash. The actual, although we use words like crash, actually, I was at EY at the time, but it was a bit more of a slower burn, and it was very specific, really, to certain sectors. Whereas actually, this is a very different type of crisis to that. The speed at which we went into lockdown, many employers had to react very, very quickly. And I think there will be. It all depends on the economic outlook and how quick the upturn is. But we can already see with things getting back to normal in some sectors or starting to get back to normal, there's some indication that employers will start to open up. If that demand is there, then yes, absolutely, they will start hiring again. And just to give a bit of positive news as well, looking at that health and pharmaceuticals, we did a webinar this week with Bayer Pharmaceuticals, of course, which I've already mentioned, and we've just actually arranged virtual work experience across 7 regions around the UK with the NHS. So again, Catherine will follow up with you after this session, guys, and that will kick off from September. So clinical, whether that's going into the training TNA, the training nursing route, or indeed non-clinical, technology, facilities, finance. The NHS recognise there's so much talent out there that potentially they're not accessing, and we're helping them by doing that through virtual work experience, again helping with the Gatsby 6, for example. So watch this space. Healthcare obviously in big need at the moment, and as you can see there, it reflects in the numbers. Stephen, do you want me to go on to the next slide? Sure, next slide, that'd be great.
Fantastic.
So I mentioned those employers that are still hiring. As I said, when you actually look, the majority of vacancies, majority of recruitment is still going ahead this year. And we've seen a really big shift of employers switching to virtual hiring. Some of this is a trend that's been happening over recent years anyway. You'll have seen this, when you look at employer selection processes. So things like video-based interviewing has become very common in our industry over the last decade or so. But of course, with coronavirus, employers not being able to bring people into their offices, those businesses that need to hire have been shifting their recruitment processes online. I think it's really important that your students get to understand these processes, because I think that a lot of this could well stick, particularly in the medium term as coronavirus limits the amount of travel that people can do and limits the amount of people that organisations do want into their buildings or onto their premises. But also, virtual hiring is pretty efficient for employers, actually. It's easier to manage, it's easier to get resources from the business to engage with this kind of activity. So I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if a lot of this stuff sticks in the longer term. So what are employers doing? So very much an increased use of web-based interviews. Sometimes this is simply using Skype or Zoom to do an interview, but more commonly, actually, it's a formal video-based platform where a question is asked of the candidate. They then have a limited amount of time to answer that question. That whole video is recorded, and the actual employer looks at that interview at a later date. So I think we'll see that being used even more as the months tick by. Organisations have been modifying their assessment centres. So they've been, again, using tools like Zoom, Teams, and actually using all the facilities of breakout rooms to actually be able to get candidates through a selection process. So they've been using, what they've mostly done is taken what they used to do face-to-face and put that online. So it might be a group exercise, might be a case study, might be a role-playing exercise. And yes, that's been used on a virtual platform. Some employers have gone all the way through to offer stage and made an offer stage at the end of that virtual process. Some others, they'll get to a kind of a tentative offer. So they'll make an offer at the end of that virtual hiring process. They're still expecting that candidate to come in at some time in the near future when offices can reopen. If you go to our website, throughout this crisis, we've made our webinars and our podcast free for everybody to access. And actually, if you have a dig around the libraries there, we've actually got employers talking about subjects like this. So there is one in there from FDM, Big IT Recruiter, and also Fujitsu, talking about how they've built their virtual assessment centres. So there's some good intelligence out there if you want to get an idea of what employers are doing. And
just to bring in Hannah here, if that's okay again, Hannah. I was just going to say, with one particular brand that we work with, I think it's about 25% of females drop out at the video interview stage due to maybe confidence issues about not wanting to do that, for example. At Pathway, we then identify with that brand to make sure that we're working with the females, to make sure that we're coaching them a little bit more proactively through that, so they don't feel that they want to drop out. Similarly, deprived backgrounds from different demographics might do less well at the assessment centre, maybe because they don't have a parent who works in the professional service, for example. I just wonder, from an employer point of view, do you think more work should be done by companies like mine and across schools and teachers to make sure that underprivileged students aren't going to struggle more with having to do it online? I mean, what's your position on it? It's a difficult one, isn't it?
I actually think it's not that much of a kind of recent phenomenon. Kind of video interviewing came in about 5 years ago now, and kind of hit was the big boom. As did, psychometric tests have been around for years and years and years, and we know that we had to kind of support students and get them to practice and get them to understand, really to feel comfortable when they were kind of entering those assessments. And I think there are, like I've said, our partnerships, we work with you, we work with other providers. You guys are already doing an amazing job of supporting those students and getting them used to. And I think what we have to remember is these are a tech-savvy generation. And I don't think they are as put off by tech as what we think they are, because actually, for some of them, it's kind of all they've ever known. So I think it's just kind of keeping in mind, actually, the generations coming through, what is their new normal, which is, using mobile phones and technology at the drop of a hat. But of course, yeah, as someone who's head of a grad recruitment, it is my responsibility to constantly monitor our assessment processes and sense check and make sure that the things that we're putting in place aren't having adverse impact against set populations, and that's what we do. So yeah, absolutely, should be supporting them, but I don't think we should kind of have it in our minds that these students are actually that put off doing these types of exercises.
Oh, it's a great positive message. Thanks very much, Hannah. Stephen, should I go to the next slide?
Sure, that'd be great.
Great.
So I mentioned what's happening with sort of work experience, internships and placements at the start. So yes, obviously when the coronavirus happened, there were employers bringing some people in over Easter, and those were pretty much cancelled on the spot. But actually, a lot of employers very quickly adapted their programs and put them online. So maybe employers can't offer a full experience, they can't get people into their buildings and premises, but actually what a lot of employers are doing are things like skill sessions online. They're doing some projects virtually, they're offering online mentoring. At the graduate level, to give you an example, so something like IBM, for example, they bring a lot of placement students in. They come in on a one-year placement, and they've kept all their placement students. You know, they've delivered laptops to home addresses, make sure people have got, you know, good broadband connections. Particularly picking up some of the comments you were just making around diversity, Chris, being conscious that not everybody has full and equal access to either software or hardware. So we're seeing a lot of that happening, and I think employers are doing more and more of this. It's when they actually can't get out and do things physically, it's what can they do virtually and online. I think there's some great opportunities coming up where employers will be able to have stuff that can be used much more widely, because it is, you know, it might be pre-recorded, it might be able to deliver virtually. So actually it takes a bit less time to deliver because you haven't got to factor in all those travel costs. So I think we're going to see more and more of that happening over the autumn.
And Stephen, I think it's about 68% or so have probably, I think, around cancelled work experience. Was that right? Is that an ISE stat that I've got right?
Yeah, I think it was. I forget all the data we got buried in our report.
Oh,
it was pretty high.
Yeah, I think it is about 68%. So I suppose, and I do know of young people with big brands where they have been let down, obviously. But what I'm starting to see with our employers is that now employers are starting to get savvy, starting to do these virtual work experience programs. And actually, who knows, we could end up being in a better situation where it's more socially mobile for students to turn up to these sessions. Do you think we'll see that dip, but then potentially a bit of a revamp, and who knows where we'll be with it?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it already. And on the whole diversity, social mobility piece, at the start of this crisis, it was just in the too difficult box. Employers were having to deal with firefighting, you know, their immediate needs. So it wasn't something they really, to be honest with you, had the capacity to pay too much attention to. It's very much a hot topic of conversation now. We've produced a lot of content on this. Employers really are absolutely aware that actually what they do, they still want to maintain those diversity policies, particularly because we've got the Black Lives Matter experience over recent weeks, and there's also the data coming out about how those from poorer communities, from different ethnic backgrounds, are hit harder by coronavirus. So that really is front and centre of employers' minds, and they're building a lot of that thinking now into not only their recruitment and selection process, but how they get out there and talk to students and interact with them.
And Stephen, just one more stat. I do a lot of reading on your stuff. I'm pretty sure it's 80% of employers don't mind what you are studying in terms of subjects. It's about, like I mentioned at the start, would you just, any point of view from you, used to obviously own the recruitment at EY, now across the ISE, what message would you have for teachers who are maybe a bit more old school in terms of you've got to do this to get there?
Yeah, the answer is 86% of employers do not recruit by subject discipline. We've already mentioned law, you know, a firm like A&O, Big Four accountancy. The actual intake, if I remember, the graduate intake that actually had an accounting and finance degree was around about 10%. So even when employers talk about relevant degrees, often that's a pretty broad definition. And it's a very much a UK thing. If you go anywhere else in the world, you know, I do a little bit of work internationally. It's not, it's very much, you know, if you want to be a lawyer in Germany, you've got to do a law degree. Whereas you think about all the professions in the UK, even medicine, you know, you can do a conversion course into medicine from any undergraduate degree. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can do it. So yeah, employers very much, they're looking for people with, you know, the intelligence, the practical intelligence, the abilities to problem solve, and all those employability skills that we talk about. It really is that complete candidate. And yeah, most employers tell us the actual specific subject is not the driver of why they hire people. It's not what makes a difference. I'll let you to a little secret. When I was at EY, and the accounting and finance students, we did still hire them, but they had the worst track record when it came to passing their professional exams.
Wow, don't tell that to your students, people. But no, that's really interesting. 86% there don't recruit by subject discipline. I think that's a really, really key point. And when I was speaking to the A&O trainees, many of them had gone and studied their passions and then realized, actually, my passion's law, and I'm going to do the conversion, and I'm going to go and do this. So if I'm advising a young person on what to pick for A-levels, potentially pick what you're passionate about, get the good grades, do well, and go and do what you're passionate about, and then find your way to where you want to go. I think that's a really interesting stat. And Hannah, Stephen, hopefully you agree with me with that. I think it's a key point. Sometimes in education, we're so focused on grades, it's quite good to hear that from what employers are saying. Sorry, in terms of subject specific.
Yeah, agreed. And Hannah was talking about the 2-1 with academic track record. That is true, and that definitely does help into the factor in whether employers look for specific grades or not. They do look at somebody's academic performance, because actually it's an indication of how hard you worked. It's much easier to work hard when you're doing a subject you enjoy. I think the other thing is, particularly when it gets to degrees, that academics don't like to hear this, but a first does not necessarily mean that you're guaranteed a good job. Most employers actually, they might have a benchmark of a 2-1, but whether it's a first or not, they won't recognise that as a good thing. But actually, if you've got a first and they're a pure academic but can't do all the soft stuff, you're not going to get through an employer selection process.
Absolutely. Stephen, I'm going to put you on the spot here. You don't have to answer it. Based on your knowledge, if you were to have your time again and go through as a 16-year-old, what would you be doing in year 12 and 13? And then where would you be going, do you think? Or at least what would you be trying to do to make that decision correct for you?
I made some, funny enough, I was talking to my 13-year-old daughter about it this morning, because we were talking about her choices that have just come through. And I thought I was going to be an engineer, because kind of all my mates at school were doing the same thing. I'm just not a detail person, so why on earth I chose that kind of subject? So I did physics. See our grey hairs, O-levels, sorry. I was rubbish at it. So yeah, I made different choices. And I didn't go to university straight away. I went when I was 25, I went a bit later. And I think if I'd have known, had a clear idea of what to pursue what you're really good at and what you enjoy doing, and then actually you can make your career choices a bit later in life, I think I definitely would have made some different choices.
No, absolutely. So I'm getting go on, Hannah. Anything from you on that?
Oh no, it's funny. I've thought about this before, and yeah, I think I would have, knowing everything that I know now, especially around kind of higher education sector. Quite honestly, one of your questions to me was, what advice would you give to the teachers in terms of advice back to the students? And I think raising aspirations is so important. I remember when we had someone come in to talk to us from Oxford and Cambridge, and just the way they went about it just didn't make you think that you could do it. It was very kind of like, and this was years ago now, I know things have changed, but it was very much like, only certain people really. And actually, knowing everything I know now, yes, I went to a very good university, but would I like to have pushed a little bit higher up that Russell Group table? Yes, absolutely. Would I've probably gone and done a different subject? Now I know in terms of kind of access and teachings and just kind of more about how the business world works. Yes, probably. So yeah, it would be great to have my time again, but sadly not.
No, thank you, Hannah and Stephen. Stephen, next slide. So I'm getting you sidetracked here.
That's all right. Yes, crack away. Next slide. Yeah. So again, I won't go into the detail on this. So this covers universities and school level activities. So we asked employers, how are you going to approach this autumn season? And actually, on one of the things there, you'll see the biggest lines are the not sure. Actually, just that level of uncertainty. And if you think about this, the period we've been in lockdown is about as far away we are from the autumn, particularly being on campus. So we've still got, a lot can change in that time. So most employers are telling us actually they're going to really limit the face-to-face activities that they do. I think even if lockdown eases, employers' own risk assessments means they're going to be unlikely to be sending their people out to events where there's going to be lots of people there, lots of travel involved. So I think we're going to see a real cutback on that face-to-face side. But that does present huge amounts of opportunities in terms of actually how people will be able to engage virtually. So we're seeing lots of activity around virtual careers fairs, lots of employers talking about what can they do, what can they create that can be used in the curriculum, and what can they do to run things like insight events actually on their own platforms. There are also, a lot of vendors in this space who also have platforms that they'll be enabling employers and students of all types to use and engage with. So I think a lot of the autumn is going to be virtual, but I think there's going to be some great opportunities to do things quite differently, and there'll be a little bit of trial and error, but I think it's also a great opportunity, not just for diversity of candidates, but diversity of location. So those areas in the country where it is difficult for employers to get to, where they haven't got offices, I think we can have a lot better access for to pupils who may not have had some of this stuff in needs to get hold of before.
Exactly. I know we've got teachers from Wigan, Northern Ireland on this call. They can be doing things in London far easier if it's online, and that could be inspiring a young person to take that first step. So I do think we've got to look at the positives from that point of view, like Stephen's mentioned. Catherine, did you say you had a couple of questions, I think?
Yeah, it was more so comments really, while we're on the topic of, everything being more virtual in the autumn term. And it's just good to hear some feedback from some of the teachers. And it was quite interesting saying that their year 13s who are not progressing to university have been using online resources, looking at video interviews, application process and first impressions, which has been helpful, to remind them of these things. And interestingly, those students who perhaps don't necessarily engage well in classrooms have, engaged far better using these, virtual resources. So it's just interesting to hear. And the more I speak to teachers, I have heard the same. So it's just an interesting comment.
It's back to Hannah's point, isn't it? Students are used to it, and they might thrive under this. They will thrive. No, thank you, Catherine. Sorry.
Well, I've heard a similar thing on that, which is that, students who, going into big careers events where, if they're a little bit shy, because we're still talking about people who are maturing. So there's some stuff you get used to. So actually the idea of going up and talking to an employer and speaking about it might be a little bit intimidating, but actually much easier to do on virtual. So yeah, I think employers are definitely aware of that.
Excellent, thank you. Recruitment plans for next year?
Yeah, so next year. So let's think about next year as well, because it's not just about exactly what's happening now. So we asked employers what they're planning to do. Again, this will change as basically what happens with the economy changes, and also the level of government stimulus that is put into the economy. So government is actually working quite hard behind the scenes at the moment, thinking about what can they do for this youth market. And I'm hoping we start to see some announcements over the next couple of weeks. Will there be incentive for employers to recruit more apprentices? Will there be incentives around internship placement kind of programs? I'm very much hoping that there is. And I'm hoping a lot of that is done locally through LEPs, but we'll have to see what comes from that. Because if they don't, there's going to be a real problem. We've got furlough coming to an end, so employers have real pressure on their headcounts, and bringing in new talent, actually when you might have actually, to be honest, too much on your books at the moment, is going to be a real challenge. But despite all that, actually what employers are telling us, yes, of course, the big chunk is they just don't know. But actually already nearly 40% are telling us they expect to hire about the same, some telling us they'll recruit more, but obviously there are some who are going to recruit less. If you're in the airline business, if you're running a rail company, it's fairly obvious you just literally aren't going to need the same number of people you might have done in the past. But in the emerging talent space, the employers we work with, they do take the longer term view. Hannah's already mentioned this. If I go back to my time at EY, if we weren't bringing people in at the junior levels and training them up, when the economy gets better, you don't have enough people, in those key roles that are delivering client projects. That is very much on a lot of employers' mind, which is why you find that actually a lot of them will protect their student hiring over the next year or two. But having said that, that doesn't mean it's going to be an easy year. And I think what happens next year will all depend on how quickly the economy bounces back and how long any recession does last for.
Absolutely, thanks, Stephen. And with the conscious of time, because I know teachers might be teaching this afternoon. Fantastic to have your input there.
Can I just say just one thing, Chris? Just on that, it's really just about students. I mean, our message to students is you've got to have a story to tell about what you did during this crisis. Right. So whether that's people at school or whether at universities, you may not be able to get a part-time job, but you can volunteer to do stuff. You can do all the stuff online we're talking about. And when it be asking. So it's really important that students take, a proactive, flexible viewed and do as much stuff as they can, because it will bear fruit, you know, when the jobs market does pick up again.
And just on that, actually, we do work with Danny at the co-op, and you can become a member pioneer. So students have learned through the co-op webinars, and you can look online. Catherine will send this link, I think, in the follow-up, and you can go and volunteer for 5 hours a week, I think it is, and I think it might even be paid, actually. So it's fantastic opportunities to give back and help out in the local community. Students have been coming up with ideas about, you know, going and delivering food to the elderly in their communities as well, and coming up with things like that. Cancer research as well. We had webinars with them talking about fundraising and what you can be doing in this time. Hannah, if I was pitching to you in an interview with all these sort of things that I did over COVID-19, would that look favourable on my application?
Absolutely, Chris. Hired in an instant.
Thank you. I'll have a think about that. Change my career potentially. Sarah from oh, sorry, Hannah, please do.
No, I was just going to say on a serious note, yes, absolutely. And one thing that I've been saying to students at the moment, this is a slightly older age group, but for those at universities who potentially have had their maybe vacation schemes, I know some were kind of cancelled or kind of postponed or changed, however, whatever happened to them, you know, they still achieved a place on that scheme. And I think that's something employers are very mindful. So, you know, when we're going through applications later this year, having those things noted, but in brackets just putting postponed due to COVID is absolutely fine. It's still, to Stephen's point, it tells us the story of what you've been doing with your time during the period.
Yeah, and that's, again, why I'm so passionate about what we're doing with all these webinars and tracking that and reporting it back to you as teachers. Every webinar students turning up to, they're tracking, you know, some of them are putting it on their LinkedIn, and it's great. And they're saying, I was proactive during this period, and I learned about where I wanted to go. We've got Sarah from Berkshire. Hi, Sarah. We love virtual work experience and virtual visits. Why are the Gatsbys being nervous about it? This is the Gatsby benchmarks. Stephen, in your line of work, do you do much with Gatsby benchmarks, and have you got much insight into them, I wonder?
So are aware of them, and we very much support them, actually, because we think that they're a great framework for everybody to operate to, and it also helps employers understand what's needed. But I've not been following them lately, to be honest with you, and I think I don't see any reason why. Actually, you know, a lot of the stuff shifting to virtually, it works perfectly well for all those Gatsby benchmarks. It's about the content and about how people interact, rather than actually having to be, you know, physically sat in the same room as people.
No, absolutely. And Gatsby 5 and 6, I know that they've put out some indicators around what could qualify, but I think Gatsby are just holding off saying it definitely will qualify. And so maybe for Sarah, it is quite frustrating. But I just think we've got to use common sense in all this and be like, if we think it's right for young people, it seems to be doing well for them, whether that's someone holding up an iPhone and showing you around a construction site, does that count as Gatsby 6 and seeing the site? Well, if you can't access the site, I think we should tell them that it probably does. And I think a lot of teachers are using common sense around that. Catherine, any other questions or any final questions from teachers, or others will start to wrap up?
Yeah, no, we do have a question from George, and I might ask Hannah this one. So he says, if you follow your passions, but then later decide on what you want to do, which sector is inevitably harder to build a portfolio of work experience for that sector? And it's quite an interesting question.
Yeah. Good question. I can only talk you through, I guess, from kind of my experience to date. So I think something like the legal sector, I think it's a lot easier to make that transition because there are, you know, really set conversion courses. Like I recruited a gentleman who'd been a doctor in NHS for 12 years and decided he didn't want to do it anymore the other year, you know, and could make that transition. When I was at the consultancy, I know consultancies tend to pinch quite a lot of the STEM students, and especially for engineers, I think it's a lot harder for an engineer to, if they've not gone and kind of gained their engineering experience first, and kind of tested the water a little bit, see if it's what they want to do. If they've gone into consultancy first and then want to go back to being an engineer, well, they've just lost, I don't know, several years of opportunity to build up exactly that portfolio of experience. So I think it's about thinking through what are the skills, qualifications maybe needed to excel within that sector. And if you go and do a kind of broader portfolio, is that in any shape or form potentially going to hold you back? Not necessarily. I think it's just about the order in which you structure it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah. Good stuff. Catherine, over to you briefly on this part, please.
Yeah, great. So we do have a few new teachers on this session today. So please do give us an email at schools.team@Pathway CTM. We will, of course, follow up from this session with details around our virtual work experience so your students can apply, although deadline for that is today, so it'll be a quick turnaround, but we still do have applications open. And also the link to our YouTube channel where we've got all our previous recordings of our webinars, so you can have a look at that, and do feel free to share to your students. And of course, if you do have any further questions, yeah, please do get in touch.
Good stuff. I'm just multitasking there. Sorry, we just asked to put the email in straight away. I think that's the last slide, actually. And Hannah and Stephen, I'll come to you in a second just to conclude. But some good stuff there from John saying, thanks all, a very worthwhile discussion. Thank you for a fabulous webinar. Really useful, thank you. And we've had teachers stay on right till the end, which is fantastic. Hannah, to you first, I suppose. Any final remarks? And thank you very much for your time.
No, I think just say, I don't envy you all in kind of the current climate, but I think it's so important to continue just raising all the aspirations of the young people coming through and making sure that they, really kind of lift up and look out and trying to access everything that there is out there in order for them to succeed.
Thank you, Hannah. And Stephen. Yeah,
I'd agree with that positivity. It is a difficult period, but recessions end, we come through crises, and this is something we can look back on, and as much as we can instill that in our young people and get them thinking about the future, the better.
And Stephen, just one more point on, if I did want to hear more from the ISC, how could I go about that? Should we put that in the email to the teachers on this?
That'd be great. Yeah, my email's really easy, Stephen with a PH at isc.org.uk. If you want to get in touch with me directly, just visit our website, isc.org.uk. Loads of content on there for you to use, and also ways to get back in touch with us. So love to hear from you.
Brilliant. So thank you very much indeed. Please do the type form that I've just put in the chat box as well, just to give us your feedback on the session. I guess our next session will be in September. I'm not sure who the employers will be, but there'll be 3 or 4 different employers there. Again, we can have as many teachers as we want on that. And then, of course, make sure you're pushing it out to your parents to make sure that they can get involved in our program too. And of course, the students from September. We're not signing up students before September because you're so busy at the moment trying to organise what's going on. So we're going from September with the student sign up to kick off our academic year again from then. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Hannah. And thank you so much for the teachers. Enjoy your summers, and thanks for all the hard work you're doing over this difficult period. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.